And Richard, from the sunny shores of Perth, love to hear from your introduction as well.
I come from primarily a corporate finance background. Much of that was spent overseas. I've lived in the US for extended periods and Mongolia of all places. I made the decision to move to working with retail clients back in 2014, and I have been doing that here as a traditional advisor since then. Just looking at the infinite or near infinite limitations of the traditional advice industry, I really wanted to get into the robo space, which I have done. I now own an SEC registered advice business in the United States, and I'm actually just about to launch a hedge fund too.
Wow, it is keeping you busy from Mongolia to robo advice. I think
yeah, I don't like it easy.
Now, what's that number one thing that you think in the digital environment your customers want and matter to you most? Richard, going to you first. As you mentioned before, I think you became frustrated with how advice in the digital was being delivered to those customers, and you set up your own business to do it. So what do you think is the number one thing that your customers are looking for?
First of all, let me just give some context to that frustration. So the traditional advice business, which I must say I still practice in, it's a clunky, elitist mess, which in its optimal form helps people who already have a decent amount of money to get a bit more money. It basically serves no other function. So, you know, what ultimately happens is that, you know, 80% of the population is left behind because they simply don't have enough to justify the fees that you have to charge because of the tremendous levels of inefficiency associated with providing traditional advice. So, you know, I think, I mean, in a lot of these discussions around digital advice, people are really thinking, okay, well, how can we make robo advice something almost as good as traditional advice? I think completely the opposite. I think traditional advice is inherently flawed, and the scope to actually deliver value to a great number of people is far higher in the robo world than it ever was or ever could have been in the traditional world. In terms of what seems to be most important to people, I mean, you can obviously see that values are pretty important to me. Increasingly, values are super important to the customer too. And this is where the institutions have really failed. And this is where the regulators have really failed as well. But definitely values alignment is huge. And I mean, we haven't rolled out a significant marketing campaign in the US yet, but our conversion rate is north of 90% across age groups.
Wow.
And that's really just based on us saying who we actually are and then actually being that thing that we say we are.
So Richard, you talked about setting up your own robo. I mean, that is a very clear strategy to do that. Maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think for a lot of people, that seems quite a daunting step. How are they actually going to do that, and what are the strategies that you've used?
Well, look, first, let me say setting that up was not easy, and it took a really long time. You know, and this is in a situation in which, you know, I couldn't actually travel to the United States to do any of this, so I had to do it in the middle of the night. You know, so look, I'm very fortunate in that I do have an existing network in the US from the time that I've spent there, so that's been very, very helpful. But in terms of now, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you want on this question. The digital gap could mean almost anything. So do you want to just be a little bit more specific with that?
It's a great point, because what we find is, and maybe because you're right, the digital gap covers a lot of areas. I think particularly in this point is the digital gap between an institution and its customer. So what is that gap between what is a typical financial institution and its customer? So how do we close that gap?
Well, look, I mean, in terms of the way institutions provide financial advice to individuals, they're basically just working from a template anyway. So all you're actually getting when you get financial advice from an institution is a really, really, really expensive robo service. You know, you've got a lot of stricture around the approved product list. You know, the list of investments from which you can recommend, the list of insurances from which you can recommend. You know, the way in which you have to have people's portfolios allocated to their risk profile at all times, i.e., basically what a robo does. So what ends up happening is that you end up paying thousands and thousands of dollars for some guy in a suit to sell you exactly what a robo would have done for you anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's if institutions aren't thinking about replacing the skyscrapers full of guys in suits with robos that are targeted to their home demographic, then they are absolutely insane.
Look, you're building a robo. You're saying you're getting like huge, as we talked before the panel started, you're getting great take up, right? So if you look at, you know, what has worked in that space, obviously not 40-page reports, I assume, and PDFs in your digital wealth tool for the customer, but what, you know, you're seeing it firsthand. What is working and what is maybe not?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and I mean, you know, we have to differentiate between what would work for a business like mine and what would work for one of your institutional clients, right? So what has been working and what I expect to continue working for us is growing community around our brand. You know, that has been happening and it's going to continue to happen. And that's ultimately, you know, how we're going to do whatever it is we end up doing. Institutions can't really do that. You know, they definitely get stuck when it comes to trying to be values based because everyone can see through it. So the only hope that they really have is to, I mean, if I was deploying an institutional robo solution today, what I would be doing is I would be looking to win this race to the bottom in terms of fees that is happening and is killing headcount across the finance industry as a whole, and that's a good thing in my opinion. And leveraging that as an opportunity for cross-sell and upsell. That's the best way an institution can deploy a solution like this.
And do you think, as you've launched something, as you say, a large institution sometimes, you know, the startup direct to consumer can talk about its brand in a more, or its community in a more relatable way? How do you feel, you know, I'm sure institutions, obviously they were small companies at one point. Is that like, how do they overcome that? Also, I don't got any thoughts around that, because we've seen the smaller brands grow, but, you know, at some point they're going to cross that threshold and become corporate as well. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the way my business is set up, I've got an investment committee, and I've got a marketing person, and I've got a couple of people who are acting as ambassadors in the United States. Now, with the capabilities of the technology, there's actually no real reason for me to ever have a lot more people than that. And it's ultimately, you know, that, and that's the beautiful thing about this space. I get to keep my values. I get to work with people who share my values. I'd never have to compromise on that. So my clients are never having to deal with someone who's misaligned with where they want to be. Institutions do not have that luxury, obviously. You know, there are too many people. Everyone knows that large organizations are sociopath factories. You know, that's extremely well documented. You know, let's be real. Yeah. So, you know,
great, love it.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I get to talk about things I believe in, and that's why I love being able to position myself in this way and being able to scale that up almost without limitation.
So maybe just to come to a summary that we have. So I think we've looked through these three different questions. I maybe would like to ask for one key takeaway from each of you as we wrap up. For the people who've listened to this who are thinking, how am I going to do digital? Whether they're at the biggest organization or at a firm that's, let me think, a quarter of the size of Eden, which would be one, because you have four. So what would be that one takeaway from the, closing, thinking about the customer? Let's phrase it in this way. If you're thinking about your customer in the digital world, what's the one takeaway people should focus on?
I would say, I mean, if you're looking to start something, absolutely embrace whatever your genuine values are as an individual, because ultimately that's what people are going to respond to. And that's how you're going to build your following, and that's how you're going to be able to reach whoever you need to reach. If you're an institution, I would say don't even attempt to do that, because people have become far too clever at sniffing out your bullshit. So play to your strengths, play to your scale, play to delivery to, your giant mailing list at almost no cost.
Right.
So different message for the two different groups.